Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Intangibles Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Xavier Tar, and in this episode, we're going to go in depth into two of Alex's speeches that he used to compete with the international contest. One of them is his 2016 speech, and one of them was just from this past year. We did this interview months before Alex actually competed with this speech. But since he already competed, I included some of the clips of his speech in there. So let's dive in.
My second speech was much more emotionally raw for me. And the title of that one was The Boy Who Never Learned How to Love. And that speech was about the emotional journey of going from being a very lonely person in high school because of some of the lessons that I learned. And they were lessons that were taught in good faith. It wasn't evil. But basically that your value is measured by your performance in school. So measurable performance, grades and other things that the advice that always is associated with this is that, from my dad, is that you always want to take the action that leaves the most doors open to you, and that there's steps that you can take in your life that close doors, and there's steps that you can take that open more doors, and so good grades and other things open more doors. And that advice in and of itself is true. And I'm grateful for the ways that my life has been shaped by that. I mean, a master's degree in engineering has opened a lot of doors for me. I don't think I'd be in the job that I was in unless I had that master's degree. I don't think that the folks who took the risks to put me in the place I'm in, I don't think I'd be there unless they had that confidence that I could make it through a program like RIT's master's engineering program. That said, I think the corollary to that advice is that there's some doors that don't need to stay open, and to count the cost of what it takes to keep those doors open.
You catch him on his own, though. The boy is anxious. He's striving to live up to the expectations he's gotten. Where they came from doesn't matter because he's got them there, fixed, those expectations. And he's numbing his way through his days. When he's not working to meet those expectations, he's probably thumbing his way through some video game to deal with the pain of never being good enough. He's frowning, maybe. But chances are he's simply blank.
The other unspoken, or it was never turned into a maxim, like keep doors open. The other side of that was how much judgment and criticism of other people that I learned. And so everybody I was better than because of the grades that I had and the whatever set of things I did or didn't do that my friends didn't do or did do. I'd say friends, that people at my school did or didn't do. I could find a way that I was better than just about anybody I met. And that made me into a jerk, and a very lonely jerk at that. That's what that speech was about, and learning how to undo that habit with Corey, and Corey having taught that to me. And so it was a very raw speech. And so I wasn't able to joke about it, the experience, or even add humor to that speech in the way I needed to make it have the impact that it could have had. That was my second speech. I notice more of the kind of poetry that I really enjoy writing in there, but it didn't have the levity to help people through it. And so I took that speech to the division, but the speeches that beat me in that contest had the humor that my speech lacked, and that allowed their messages to go down smoother than mine.
And to teach, in the immortal words of Nat King Cole, the greatest thing you'll ever learn. Just to love and be loved in return. Adam Toastmaster.
2021's coming around. I know you've been various directors and things for the years that you haven't competed that you weren't allowed because of those positions, but is that something you're considering? And if so, any thoughts of where you would be taking your speech at this point? Obviously subject to change, we're 6 months out.
Biggest lesson that I've learned in the last year has to do with word of the year. And I could give a whole, maybe that topic deserves its own podcast. And it's a speech that I've given in various forms over the last year. And it's changed as I've learned more and more about it. It's something that a seed that Corey planted as we were talking about what our words for the year in 2020 would be. And the seed that he planted was soar, like how you fly, not a pain in your butt.
Be a soar, Alex.
Yes.
Be a soar.
Soaring instead of flapping. The image that jumps immediately into my mind is the difference between how an eagle flies and how a chicken flies.
A chicken, in order to fly, jumps as high as it can, flaps as hard as it can for as long as it can, to resist that inevitable pull of gravity. Now, a different question, and I'm hoping for a different answer here. How many of you have ever tried to catch an eagle? Now, I'm hoping for a different answer for two reasons. The first reason is that catching eagles is totally illegal. Never do it. And the second reason is that no one looks at an eagle and thinks, I want to catch that. If you see an eagle as it's flying, what you think is, I want to fly. Because eagles don't fly just by flapping their wings. They fly by making the slightest adjustments to their wings, to be carried on winds that are bigger than themselves.
So there's all sorts of opportunities for humor, and there's all sorts of opportunities to talk about things that people can relate with, trying really hard and not getting very far. That there are these very rare moments in life where, some folks will call it a state of flow. Other folks will talk about it as passion, or some folks will talk about it as follow your dreams. But what it is it's that soaring feeling of not trying and accomplishing great things, covering great distances. And the power that makes that possible is that you've tapped into something that's much bigger than yourself. And that's my experience of this year, that the things that I've been able to do in the last few years, all the things that I'm proudest of and feel the best about, are not things that I tried really hard at. And in fact, all the places where I felt that I failed the most or felt the worst about are things that I tried really hard at. So there's figuring out how to get that into a 5 to 7 minute package is going to be a journey of probably a few months at least. But that seed of an idea is so freeing. Once it started growing in my life, it has been one of the most freeing things, because it resets all of the circuits in my brain that associated trying really hard with accumulating personal value and worth, because you're worth what you produce, and your production is based on how hard you try. Like that was my operating system. And so the state of heart and mind that was most rewarded by that value system is exhausted and miserable and negative. That's the state that I was in when I was accomplishing the most according to that value system. How stupid is that? But that was the best I could do. this year recognizing that if I am exhausted and negative and complaining, I'm out of that soaring state.
Another snapshot. It's a few years later, and it's time for Corey to show me how to lead. Now, I am jealously waiting and watching for the moment that I get to see Corey flap. Because I know, whenever I have led, I have had to flap. There's boxes to check, there's things to do, there's demanding details. And all of that, for me, meant a whole lot of flapping. And I flapped with the best of them. And I got things done, but no one seemed to want to follow the trail of feathers I was leaving behind. And so I watched. And as he led, Corey just kept on soaring. He trusted that if that passionate purpose was powerful enough, the boxes would get checked. He trusted that if he shared love and freedom along the way, that people would come alongside him to do the things that needed to be done. He trusted in the wind that was carrying him.
Now, I know this is something that you've been wrestling with and have been working on gaining wisdom for. So is there something like a tangible short example that you'd have of going through flapping versus soaring per se?
It's not small, but it's tangible. And it's fresh for me that we've recently had discussions about self-control. Probably the first thing that comes to mind whenever anyone who's listening to this podcast thinks about self-control is trying really hard, especially when it comes to bad habits or even addictions. That self-control is me using my willpower to do or not do a thing that is hard for me to do or not do. That is the epitome of flapping. Because, and the way that I've talked about this chicken kind of flying is that the reason a chicken cannot fly very far is that it is fighting to overcome gravity. And addiction or bad habits are gravity. And so you're flapping to overcome something that is not within your power to overcome, especially when you're talking about addiction. That was my approach to overcoming bad habits and addiction for my whole life, was that kind of self-control. Soaring is a redefinition of what self-control is. It's relying on the power of others and ultimately a higher power to set you free from that kind of flying. Because ultimately, it's always only ever going to turn into relapse or returning to that bad habit. And sometimes it can be a progressive thing where it gets worse and worse and worse. And it's universally true. You find it in 12 steps, you find it in scripture, you find it in every kind of spiritual exploration. But that's the most tangible example I can think of the freedom that comes from giving up on flapping and finding a way to soar, is that giving up on believing that it's my willpower and my own strength that's going to get me to resist this pull of gravity that's going to pull me back into this natural state of addiction and bad habits, and that soaring is being carried by a larger power, a higher power, a wind that's bigger than me. I mean, you watch an eagle fly, they might not even flap their wings at all. Once they catch the right wind, the right thermal or the right wind going up a cliff, and they can just soar on those kinds of winds for miles and miles and miles without ever really having to move a muscle.
Maybe like the slightest movement.
Yeah. There's a really great Jim Rohn lesson about how everything by longevity tends to get off course. And so, of course, there's these little course corrections to stay inside that wind, to stay inside that power that's bigger than you. But the difference between these course corrections and getting a second pair of eyes on your life to make sure that you're staying within that soaring zone versus a chicken using all of its might to flap as fast as it can to resist gravity. It's a complete difference of the total difference of everything.
Hope you guys all had a fun time on Alex's journey as he created these speeches and also in the speeches themselves. Join us next week as Alex and I go through his experience of the Tiger Tail's journey, as well as some sage advice from him. See you next time.